Hello, everyone, and welcome to Walker Reads. I am your host, MJ Walker. Today, I will be bringing you the next chapter in my book, Consideration for Others. If you enjoy what you are hearing and watching, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It truly helps me to develop my channel. Without further ado, I bring you the next chapter in Consideration for Others. Chapter 7, Cerebral Prancings. Dawn, the second day after I had clumsily conceived of my rules, found me going for a jog around the neighborhood. I was only halfway through my desired length of 1.5 miles, and my lungs were burning, legs growing weak. Though I was keeping to a breathing pattern which helped me to keep my breath under control as the rest of my body panicked at the exertion it was experiencing, I was having great difficulty keeping myself from panting. This was my first cardio exercise in several years, and I had also been a faithful smoker for the better part of 6 years. So though I was not overweight or necessarily grossly out of shape, I was indeed greatly struggling. I imagined a quit smoking regimen in my near future. At least the cool morning air soothed my hot, sweaty face. The day after I had developed my rules, I had decided that if I wished to pursue this course of action and become a flat-out serial killer, then I really needed to get my body into top-notch shape. Memories of my struggle with Peter in the marsh were a healthy reminder of how helpful stamina and upper body strength could really be. I realized that an exercise schedule would be difficult to follow if I gave in to my body's lazy cravings and screaming protests. Though there was only one thing that really gave my new course fuel, one shining piece of evidence that my mind had agreed on our heading. The night I had crafted my rules, my insomnia ended. I slept like a baby for the first time since I murdered Peter Pengelly. In addition to being a blessed relief to a great deal of torment, both physically and mentally, it allowed the fog that had filled my thoughts for the last few weeks begin to lift. And as it did so, I took stock of my mind and regarded my fragile mental state. I also began to deeply question how truly troubled I must be. After all, I had decided to kill people and had conceived my mind that nature had hired me to the profession, so to question my sanity seemed rational at best. I finally blessedly reached my desired goal, the end point to my run, and began to pant heavily as I walked to cool down, abandoning the breathing pattern for the time being. As my blood pounded through my ears, surging through my brain, and my lungs struggled to absorb air through my ragged throat, a wave of pleasure and happiness washed over me. I had done it. I had run 1.5 miles. I coughed heavily and spat a dark matter swathed in mucus to the curb. I had nearly killed myself, apparently, but I had achieved the goal I had set for myself. I walked the block back to the house as I struggled to regain my breath once again. My heart rate calmed as I made my way through the gate and back towards the house. My thoughts returned to the matter at hand. Through my newfound clarity, especially now after day 2 of blessed peaceful sleep, I had reviewed my decisions and the trains of thought that had derived such a twisted outcome. I tried to think up ways of convincing myself to change course, to acknowledge the insanity in my choice, and to rescind my verdict. However, despite my troubled brawl with my rulings, the fog lifted from my mind as my insomnia finally broke, and peaceful sleep was ushered gratefully into my thirsty mind, revealing one thing greater than all else. My decision had put my tumultuous mind at peace. The moment I had settled on killing again and had quieted the remains of my conscience with my rules, I was finally at peace. The maddening guilt tearing into the back of my mind like a rabid animal finally returned to the shadows. All signs seemed to point directly towards me becoming a serial killer. Ring, ring! At least the bells seemed to agree. I reached the front door and unlocked the latch, opening the portal and going through. Once inside, after locking the door behind me, of course, I sought out the bottle of water I had left on the coffee table just inside the living room to my left. I drained the bottle into my parched throat and paced the living room until my heart rate finally settled to resting speed. Once I had managed to calm myself, I lowered myself to the floor for some push-ups. I found it rather disheartening as my upper body muscles screamed at me to cease my troublesome exercises. I knew my body was heavily complaining now. However, when my improved strength and stamina saved my life or ensured the death of a target, then it would all have been worth it in the end. At least that is what I had to keep telling myself. I still found it rather surreal to think of myself as a serial killer. I hadn't become serial yet, so that was the first oddity, though it was only a matter of semantics. I had already decided to become a repeat offender, so it was already serial in my brain. I struggled to finish my last couple push-ups and practically collapsed on the floor. I may have had the desire to become habitual, but my body was simply not up for the job just yet. I knew that if I tried going out now to relive that moment and commit heinous crime number 2, it would likely be the end of my run. Anybody with any semblance of athleticism could overpower me right now. Being weak did not bode well for my choice and hobby. It was that exact thought process that had me arriving at the decision of a workout regimen to get my body in shape. Can't be a runt hunting wolves. Won't end well for the runt. Of course, there were many other issues to my newfound life choice that were problematic besides my feeble body. There was the question of how on earth I planned to habitually murder evil people and get away with it. What method would I be employing in my escapades? Were some less likely to lead to a conviction? In today's modern age of forensics, I had to be excruciatingly careful if I did not wish to end up on the wrong side of the law. Furthermore, once I had exacted my dark desires, what then? I got incredibly lucky with Peter in the marsh. So many strokes of luck kept me from being seen that day. Would my luck continue? How does one dispose of a body? I had envisioned the maelstrom of questions and concerns assaulting my brain subsiding once I had arrived at that desired outcome. Sadly, that was not the case. Instead, I was berated with an entirely new set of questions and concerns, many of which were very valid. The difficulty presented in exacting a murder was not very much. It was very easy to kill someone. However, the difficulty was presented in not getting caught. Now, that was a different story. I did have quite a bit of land within the borders of my property, plenty of places to inconspicuously bury a body. I could do it quickly, quietly, and no one would see me, but the second any suspicion is shed on me, the property would surely get searched. I couldn't very well utilize my garden box method over every grave filled. Surely I would run out of space. Besides, I've just about reached a limit on how many boxes can be economically used for one person. I feel it might be a tad suspicious if I had 20 garden boxes, many in different locations and at different stages of planting. Of course, that only comes into the equation if suspicion gets cast onto me. If I were careful to not let that happen, then the property could surely become my dumping ground. Then again, I wasn't exactly sure how I felt about filling my property with corpses. Ease of access aside, it was a horrible idea. The bodies in the ground would be as good as a smoking gun in my hand. That was a no-go. Yet, I still had to address the problem of the body, for it was a very critical variable to the equation, almost as critical as how I would be carrying out the murder, which I also had not the foggiest idea on. There was much work to be done if I wished to truly pursue this path. Relishing in the calm, cool, collected nature of my thoughts and mindset, I knew that I had made the right decision. Many hours and a much-needed shower later, I found myself manning the register at Pitt's once more. The afternoon had grown late, and the sun was beginning to nestle into its home in the horizon. Over half of my shift had elapsed in the relative boredom. Despite the steady stream of customers, the store was dreadfully dull. That didn't matter too much to me, however, seeing as I had quite a bit to think on. I was so absorbed in my thoughts, the majority of my shift had passed before I realized that several hours had transpired. I pondered amusedly at how many people had come to collect their vices while I contemplated great violence. If only they knew. Back to work. The problem of execution was one that I was currently endeavoring to address. As I had experienced with the blade, using a knife introduced a set of elements that were difficult to encompass at best, impossible to anticipate at worst. Even assuming that I would be able to carry out the deed without a hindrance seemed to be a long shot. Visions of faceless opponents wrestling the blade from my grasp swam through my brain. Hand-to-hand combat was incredibly difficult, and my success would be highly dependent on my capacity to contain and utilize the element of surprise. Odds of success were decent. Odds of success without being caught were slim. "This is Humboldt, you stupid fuck. You can get away with murder round here." Though the irony of that statement had not been lost on me, the truth of it seemed questionable. I had witnessed the inability of the authorities to solve my first crime, although I felt like I had left a mountain of evidence. It was a spur-of-the-moment crime of passion, after all. Yet, Peter's corpse hadn't been discovered, and I had not. Best not to leave such pivotal moments up to chance. Using a knife just seemed too risky. Ring, ring. One of my regular customers walked in, and I was immediately caught up in conversation, discussing the latest Brandon Sanderson title we were both reading. Though the past few weeks hadn't seen me reading practically at all, Sanderson is such a prolific author that there was plenty to discuss, despite my failure to consume any more. We chatted over the titles we had been enjoying the most, then he purchased his goods and left. After he walked out, bell chiming once more, I came to realize yet another element that was to be the facade concealing my extracurricular activities: being a normal, functioning member of the community. Despite my decision to delve into the darkness of my choosing, I had to keep outward appearances up if I wished to continue staying inconspicuous. A wave of concern briefly washed over me. There were so many factors to consider, so many points to heed if I did not wish to end up on the wrong side of a prison cell. Was this truly the path I wished to pursue? Ring, ring! I was staring at a mountain of tasks to be done, a tidal wave of considerations to be acknowledged. I still had so many issues to address. The more I thought and the more I considered, the more a large knot formed in the pit of my stomach. This was going to be incredibly difficult. The fact that I had escaped prosecution for my first murder, despite being sloppy as a drunken May, seemed to be even more incredulous. Water, seclusion, and time, I learned, were my best friends in concealing the crime. If I could manage to contain the bodies I dispose of to those three elements, that would be a large step towards not getting caught. Of course, that was far easier said than done. Ring, ring! I had to research some decent areas for body disposal. I needed seclusion, plenty of exposure to the elements, and preferably soft earth. The best way to keep from getting caught, in my opinion, was to ensure the bodies were never found. Considering I had already failed in this aspiration, there was plenty of room for improvement. In that regard, it would also be wise to limit the distance between the scene of the murder and the dumping ground. It would do no good to plan such a flawless crime to get caught transporting the body. Backroads would surely be my friend. I also may wish to look into, pardon me. A timid voice smacked my brain from the clouds, and I drank in the person standing before me, as if seeing her for the first time. The smile that explodes across my face is dampened when I notice the 2 fingers and a splint on her left hand, and her right foot up to mid-calf is firmly encased in a cast. Her knee rested on one of the medical stool with wheels and brakes that looked like the skate scene would have a blast with it. The timid smile blossoming across her beautiful cheeks did nothing to hide the shame. Evening, Sally. I gave her a small bow. Caught me staring off into space again. My bad. How can I help you? You remember my name, she said as she flushed softly. I surely do, I replied with another smile. Glad to see you ditch the glasses and the ball cap. Just didn't match your style. Sally shuffled uneasily at the remark. Yeah, now I just have this fashionable scooter. Fashionable's right, I said with a chuckle. All you need now is some decals and a fresh paint job. I'm thinking flames on black mat. As long as I get a matching helmet, I think I can get behind that. Though she returned my banter jovially, no humor or cheer spread to her eyes, which swam in a fog of pain. Okay, jostling aside, time for the serious question. Got some mighty fine battle wounds there, I said, motioning to the splint in the cast. How do you manage that lovely array of injuries? That slammed the door shut on the conversation quicker than if I had open palm slapped her across the face. She immediately began regarding the grain on the counter and refused to make eye contact, her face slowly turning red. I'm a clumsy person, fall down all the time. She tried to laugh it off, but there was no humor in those sounds. Anyways, can I give Ventura green longs and a pint of rum, please? Sure botched that one, Sean. You most certainly can. I gave her another smile as I turned to retrieve the desired items. Can I bag up your goodies for you today? Sally paid for her boyfriend's stuff and carefully wheeled herself out of the store, door swinging softly shut behind her. I knew better than to do something so stupid as to asking her how she got hurt. Domestic Abuse 101. We both had no doubts about what or whom had caused such injuries. Memories of our last interaction swam into my brain, and I saw his angry little face poking in through the front doors and scowling at Sally. Travis. The angry alcoholic that had abused his girlfriend, repeatedly apparently. Heat rose from my core up to my neck and across my face, the all too familiar companion to my good friend, rage. My blood pulsed through my veins like it was chasing a rabbit down its hole. A bead of sweat began at my hairline and slowly made its way down my face. It wasn't right. Sally was a beautiful girl with a bright mind and a brighter future. What kind of world would saddle someone like Sally with someone like Travis? I couldn't pretend to know the inner workings of their relationship, but considering that physical abuse gets pulled into the equation, it can't be too loving. I imagine a good deal of verbal abuse and psychological games get played in their household. Such relationships rarely had any healthy aspects, despite the cheery facade put on for the rest of society. Yet despite the sheer abhorrent nature of his treatment of her, Sally clearly stays with the man. Not much a bystander can do but maybe call the police and hope the victim finally wises up and leaves. Fat chance of that happening, though. She'll likely stay with him for the next 20 years or until he beats her to death, whichever comes first. My thoughts stopped dead in their tracks as a realization began dawning on me. No, there is not much a standard bystander could do in such an occurrence. Getting involved hardly ever helps anyone. But I was not a standard bystander. Not anymore. I had decided to continue to murder not 2 days prior. A lot can be said for chance in the run of things. Even with astronomical odds, the dice get rolled so often that even astronomical outcomes come to pass. But for a potential target to just come dangle in front of my eyes shortly after I had decided to hunt, now that seemed a little too rich to be chance. I was wondering how I was going to pick out targets from the colossal array of shitty human beings, but it would seem that nature had once again figured that out for me. Determination settled into my mind as Travis slowly settled into my crosshairs. I didn't even know this man's last name, but that didn't matter. I hadn't known anything about Peter, and look how that one ended. I tried to beat off the throes of excitement, but the feeling burrowed deep into my chest to fester like a firecracker in a pond. There was still an avalanche of work to be done, but I had a goal. I did my damnedest to force myself into focus on working. I still had the rest of my shift to complete. However, visions of Travis trounced through my brain, hand in hand with the elation slowly growing. No more fear. No more dread. I was going to kill Travis. I turned over the engine on the truck and it sparked a cigarette while I let the machine warm up. My shift had ended very anticlimactically, though my mood had continued to improve. Thoughts of Travis still swam through my brain like a fish in a tank. I forced myself to ponder on the interactions with Sally and tried to critically analyze my decisions. It was one thing to think that nature had hired me to be a serial killer, quietly eliminating those that are poisonous to the world, however insane that sounded, and it sounded seriously fucking deranged. It was an entirely new crazy animal to just assume that targets would be gift-wrapped and plopped in front of me. I had been toying with the idea of perusing the Megan's Law website like a grocery store. Perverts and rapists seemed like an ideal place to start. However, that idea was rather daunting. The men that had been placed on that list of sex offenders were well used to being harassed and assaulted for their past crimes. Cornering a rabid animal wasn't a good idea. Best to get some practice hunting before I take on the truly difficult predators. Practice like eliminating the human turd that was Travis. Finishing up my smoke, I ground it out in the ashtray and hopped into the truck. Slamming the door and buckling up, I put the truck in drive and began heading home. I had a whole lot of work ahead of me. As much as I desired to just begin hunting and end his worthless life, my conscience screamed at me. Due diligence must be adhered. I had to research Travis, making sure I wasn't making the right decision. Make sure I was making the right decision in killing this man. I had to get to know my target. Had to know without a sliver of a doubt that Travis had become a despicable and abusive asshole, and thus the world would be a better place with him disposed of. I had to catch myself whenever I started thinking that Travis deserved to die. He may be the most detestable human being in existence. However, I had an intrinsically hard time with the concept of anyone deserving to die. I don't think anyone deserves to die. That being said, I did believe that the world would be a better place without certain people living in it. I may be spiraling into a world of evil and darkness, but I still desired to better the world. The hypocrisy of wanting to better the world by killing those I deem evil. I turned the truck into my driveway, clicking open the gate as I pulled in and clicking it closed behind me. I was still running on autopilot, deeply consumed by my thoughts. So it wasn't until I had parked the truck in front of the garage, night settling around me in the darkening sky, that I realized something was amiss. I shook myself from the swirling cogitations of my troubled brain and drank in my surroundings, still visible in the failing light. Looking around, I spotted what had made me feel so out of place. The damned koala was back. It sat at the edge of the driveway next to the garage and dully chewed on a piece of bamboo clutched in its little paws. Beady little eyes locked onto mine. The usual sensation of my fight or flight instinct kicking in was absent this time. Something told me that I need not be afraid of the koala. Something was different. I got out of the truck slowly and rounded the front bumper, hesitantly approaching the animal. I had long since determined that the koala was not real. There was no way that it could be. But even with that logical determination screaming throughout my brain, there was still that element of hesitation. I stepped closer and the koala stopped eating to regard me. I froze in place as the animal's little face studied mine. Then the koala put down the bamboo and headed off into the darkness, pausing once to look over its shoulder at me, almost as if to say, "Aren't you coming?" Slowly, I followed the marsupial. My God, if I can speak correctly, though I already knew where it was leading me. My heart began to race as memories of the last time I saw the koala flitted through my mind. Peter had been waiting for me, and the hole had been half dug up. I had since covered the hole with the garden box, but who knew what kind of fresh hell waited for me at the back of the property? The koala kept bounding forth, occasionally checking to be sure I was still following. Finally, we reached the garden box in the darkness. The koala hopped up into the lap of the man seated on the rim of the box. Peter. He caressed the koala and observed me. Unlike most of the previous apparitions of Peter, this one was not decaying and rotted. He looked like he did the day I murdered him. Pre-death, of course. Peter's eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time I wondered wildly if this man was actually dead or not. The sensation lasted only a second. What followed defied the logic of what human beings are capable of doing. I blinked, and he stood before me, towering over me like he never did while living. This undead man was a full 2 feet taller than he was originally. A monstrous hand, cold and lifeless, grabbed me by the throat and hauled me into the air as if I were no more than a feather on the breeze. I scrambled against the stone-like arm choking me and suspending me in the air, kicking at Peter, who was as hard as granite. He opened his mouth wider than I ever thought possible, and for a brief moment it occurred to me that this Peter might just devour me right here and now. The abyss revealed by that gaping maw was growing wider and closer by the second. I could feel his cold, fetid breath on my cheeks as I struggled to breathe around the stone closing my windpipe. Peter brought my face to within an inch of his, and I braced myself for the inevitable pain that was coming. "Kill Travis!" Peter bellowed at me so loud I was nearly deafened. As quickly as it had begun, it was over. I was sprawled on the ground at the foot of the garden, gasping for breath. The cool night air around me, empty and silent. End. Chapter 7. Cerebral Prancings. Despite my errors, excuse me, by the way, I hope you enjoyed what you were listening to. If you do, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and tune in every Monday morning at 7 a.m. for my other series, Rabbin' and Wizard Extraordinaire. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.